Hi, my name is Donetta Jonas, and I want to give back the service of sharing my journey. My journey was challenging in that I was not diagnosed until I was 49, and I turned 50 this year. Living undiagnosed was this kind of a journey. It shouldn't, quote unquote, by just about every physician, year after year, agony after agony. About 3 years ago, they thought perhaps I was developing MS. And about that time when they ruled out the MS, they thought that I perhaps had early onset dementia. And I went through all of these tests and all of this excruciating emotional demeaning. And keeping my spirit and my heart and remembering that God loves me. And that the journeys that we take are not about us, they're about encouraging somebody else down the road with the hope and the encouragement that we've been given. And this is a part of my story. My journey from youth was a challenge. I am a survivor. And of all three types of abuse and then some. After many, many years of recovery, and such, it's truly a miracle that I made it out with having PTSD and stress disorders that are significant. That's printed in that PIDD, or in my case, CVID, is a stress. When you have stress, it really robs you of your strength, more so than others. Living with post-traumatic stress disorder and having the difficulties of not being able to keep my health up, year after year the need for antibiotics increased. I had gone to the stage that the illness had progressed so much that I was hanging in there. And 14 years ago, after 16 years of marriage, we decided to adopt internationally. And we were able to bring a daughter home out of a Russian orphanage. I almost died when I returned to the States because I had caught bacteria and nobody understood back then the immune situation. I spent the first 4 weeks of my daughter coming home bringing back life into my bones. And at that point we still didn't know what was going on, and we just assumed that Russian diseases are pretty virulent, which they are. And 3 years later, I had the good fortune, after several months of waiting, to return to Russia. We had set an adoption in place for a son, and the towers had come down, and so we couldn't get him until that December. We returned again to Russia. And at that time, returning to Russia, our son had been placed in the unadoptables side of the orphanage. And in that made me, again, susceptible and vulnerable because I had gone over to that side of the adoption, or the orphanage. And in doing that, I have a heart for children, and I bent on the floor and knelt and dealt with the children that they call the unadoptables. These are children that are rather ill or need surgical corrections and such. So once again, after a couple of weeks in Russia this time, I returned to the States very ill. My son was very ill. I had end-stage endometriosis that had been treated for years, surgery after surgery, and by this time I had probably gone through 15 to probably 25 reconstructive surgeries within a 25-year period because nobody understood what I was going through, and also because of the severities of the abuses that I experienced. Well, 10 years later, my son now, such a joy, and he's special needs. My daughter is special needs. About a little over a year ago, my son needed to go to an allergist, and we both went through the allergy studies and such, which I had been told previously I was allergic to myself, which made no sense. What do you do with that? So this new physician that we went to happened, which is a God thing, to study at a university in Chicago. They specialize in PIDD. And this is in Phoenix, Arizona. He is in Gilbert, which is a suburb. So he worked with me. I had pneumonia and bronchitis 4 times within a 3-month period, and between steroids and antibiotics, we were reaching the end of my journey with 2 special needs kids. About that time, my elder sister died. She passed away, and she's my best friend. But in her passing, I was given the gift of life. When she passed, I was under the care of this physician, and he was trying to stop this pneumonia. She passed of such a rare and unusual lung disorder, and had so many bowel and these kinds of things over the years that also had gone undiagnosed. When I told him what she passed of, within a week he was testing me. It raised his eyebrows. And at 49 years old, I was finally diagnosed correctly. I returned to a state of dignity, realizing that it shouldn't of many a year was error of ignorance. And it took some journey for me to allow myself the grieving process. Kind of got stuck in anger because I was really ticked off, because you may or may not have experienced the chopping at the knee of the indignities of knowing that something is wrong within you and being told it's not so. I encourage you to listen to your spirit. You're not making it up. And what the best thing for you to be able to do is to hold your heart and keep true to yourself and know that you are loved and that God's intention is for you and not against you. For me, it took many years, and it took a lot of prayer. And I know that God is not to blame or at fault. And many folks say, how could he have let that happen? All of us have a journey, and you have a journey. So in this, I encourage you to quest for understanding. Lead into knowledge acquisition and gain wisdom about what you're walking through. And reach out for others who are willing to share their experience and their strength and their hope. And I hope above all that you know how beautiful you are and how much you matter to the world around you. And you fight. You fight for every breath. You fight for every day. My veins began to be blown out, and I began to get blood clots in my arms. Or so they thought, and I was very fortunate they weren't clots. But I discovered I had the smallest vein of any adult they'd ever seen. I received a port. Now the port was another journey that doesn't get spoken of much in this. We don't get educated. One thing I would hope is that perhaps in my candid explanation of my journey with a port, you may be able to get some support in this. Now, a port to some in your community may be a minor thing, because they'll say, women have their breasts cut out. There are 2 gentlemen sitting across from me, so with some courage, I will be candid. I've been married for 30 years next year, and I have a very loving, accepting husband who sees me as beautiful no matter what. That's what you need to see yourself as. Now, when you get your port, you'll have a scar on your chest. The hardest thing about getting a port is finding someone to do it. Now, what I found is the specialists in port are radiologists. You won't be told this, and you will have a hard time finding this knowledge. Some of the major hospitals, for me, here in my area in Phoenix, it was Good Samaritan. I found a specialist there and a whole department, but that's all they do. And they do about 100 ports a month. And I was very fortunate. Now, if you have to have a port, there are different kinds. There are some technologies now that are much better. I have something called a power port. It's the smallest port now, and it's designed for a woman. Ports do change your chest a bit, but not terribly. And it's an honor, and it's a badge of courage. And I was embarrassed and ashamed for a while. And then I realized, I'm blessed. I'm alive. And so are you. And you're blessed. Now, it's going to change the way you can wear your garments. You can wear your garments with dignity and say, who cares? And if you choose to do this, no, you'll get some weird people wondering if you have breast cancer. Because people with cancer will often have ports for their chemotherapy. So don't be surprised when someone looks at you and sees a port and acts as if you're dying. You're not dying. They just get confused with breast cancer. That's all. So educate. Educate everyone that you know, because that's your role now. That's your journey, to share your knowledge, your experience, and your strength. It's not an accident that you're on this road and that you're on this journey. It's not your fault. It's not God's punishment. And religion, that's the lessons of man. And if you hold that dear and that encourages you, so be it. But know this, that relationship with God is what's going to give you the courage to walk this journey. Know that you haven't done anything wrong and that it's not your fault. And that you're beautiful. And if you have a port, it's going to hurt for the first 3 or 4 months when you have to have your infusions. When they press the needle in, it's going to hurt. After about 4 or 5 months, you'll develop some scar tissue. And the ports are developed that on the edges they have a substance that encourages tissue growth to attach to it. Once that begins to heal and gets a little thicker, it won't hurt so much. But if you're small of frame, and if you're a woman, I encourage you to look into power port, because it really is better. The ports will stick out of your skin, maybe not quite a 1/4 inch. So if you get a smaller one, it's going to make a lot of difference for you. They will show a little bit on your garment. You'll have a little bump on your chest. So what? It doesn't matter, because you're alive and you're breathing and you have a story to tell. And one of the things else that I'll say, it wasn't good English, but something else that I'll say is this. I have heard it said to me by some, well, we got to keep you alive so that you can raise your children. And that grieved me. And indeed, I need to be alive to raise my children. But hear me. You have a right to be alive for you. And your life matters for you to live it. Yes, you need to be here for others. But remember, be here for yourself. And that you're beautiful. And that you're loved.